Hi everybody, this is instructor Phil Demetriadis from Fullerton College. What I wanted to do today is I wanted to show you some samples of some great drawing packets done by my students that are inside the Art 137 Basic Drawing for Entertainment Arts class. I wrote this class, and there's a reason why I wrote it. As a artist, as a student, who just finished grad school recently, and then also as a instructor, teacher, and mentor to others, I really felt that there were some important aspects of drawing that were getting lost inside the basic drawing traditional foundations inside a local department, whether it be at my college or whether it be at a local Cal State or a local university. And this was my concern. This is something that I come to notice from my years of professional experience of working in the industry and my years of being around other artists who like to draw in a sketchbook. What I notice is that basic drawing classes all have different focuses, and they depend on what the background or focus of the instructor is. For example, if you have an instructor who is a fine art traditional painter, the chances are you're likely to have a basic drawing class that deals more with still lifes and looking at still life studies with boxes and other shapes on top of fabric, and you're just sitting there at a desk and you're looking at those shapes, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. That's an outstanding and it's a great way to learn. In fact, I still recommend that course to anybody who's starting out. However, though, another thing I noticed that if there is an artist who is perhaps an illustrator who works very heavily in color, they're more likely to get involved with some other related basic drawing projects that deal with drawing shapes and then adding color into them. So one of the things I noticed that was missing is I'm getting students coming out of a basic drawing format that were lacking in the ability of core draftsmanship. They really didn't understand what drawing primitive shapes were. They didn't understand how to draw shapes in relationship to a horizon line and perspective. They definitely did not understand how to look at things from multiple point of views and then draw them. So I noticed these pros and cons happening. So one of the things I thought would be really important to do would be to create a separate class that focuses just in principles of draftsmanship and drawing, and introducing students to basic principles of design inside a basic drawing class where you're not sitting inside the class looking at still lifes the whole time. We are to some point, but we're also drawing from our imagination, and we're also going out and drawing from observation, where we're going out in public, we're looking at trees and environments, buildings and people, and we're drawing those things as we're observing them, because there's so many other factors there that change these, part of drawing when you're outside, and if it's rainy or cloudy, or how you look at your subject matter. Most importantly, how are you observing your subject matter? What point of view, or some people might call it an angle of view. Where's your horizon line? Where's your eye level? Are you sitting up above? Are you sitting below? All these factors come into the way that we draw. And I have a lot of students that come to our college from other colleges and other schools, and they were coming in not being prepared. And they would come into a class that dealt with environment design, or a class that deals with storyboarding, or even sometimes character design, and they start falling apart because they have no basic understanding of shapes and how to draw with different drawing techniques, and how to create things from simple shapes and with your imagination, and how to draw, basically, the fundamental principles. So what I did is I wrote this class, and here are sample drawing packets, and I'm really excited to share. This is Brendan, okay? And I want to share you some of Brendan's work right here. He's done a fantastic job. One of the first things that we do in this course is we start off with just drawing lots of simple shapes, okay? So we take what are the core primitive shapes? You have cubes, you have cylinders, you have toruses, also known as donuts. And what's funny about this is I learned a lot of this from actually an instructor at Fullerton College back in the day, whose name is Bob Miller, okay, Robert Miller. And Mr. Miller taught me a lot. He was the core instructor that taught me a lot about understanding how to draw, because every day we would come into class, we would reach into a box and we would pull out a different prop. We'd pull out like a shoe or a boxing glove or some other type of element that had multiple, that was, somewhat complicated to draw. We would sit down and we would draw that. When some people struggled on how to draw these elements, the first thing that we did is we talked about shape and shape concentration. And it wasn't until I got involved where I started working, I learned Maya and I became a modeler in Maya for environments, that all this clicked in me, because one of the first things that you're taught in Maya and how to model is how to understand core primitive shapes. So I realized, hey, if I can go back into a drawing point of view and teach my students how to understand and draw core primitive shapes from multiple angles from their imagination, that's going to be huge on making you a better artist. It just is. One of your jobs as a young artist is not just the drawing from the observation, but it's having the ability to cognitively think about a particular shape or look of a shape and be able to draw that from another angle without having to go say, excuse me, I need a four-sided pyramid and I need to be able to take that and rotate it above my head so I'm looking underneath that. You can't do that a lot, right? Right. So this is where you have to get into the basics of understanding the core principles of draftsmanship, where the horizon line exists, and how do we draw shape that exists in front of us, okay? So sorry, I'm babbling a lot. I don't mean to. I just want to try to explain the course and the background and the principle of what we have here. And yes, pretty soon this course will be available as an online class through part of our school system to help people understand more of the principles about drawing and draftsmanship, which to me is one of the core foundational bubbles of understanding the basics of all of art. If you don't know draftsmanship, you don't know how to draw, you're not going to get into the human figure. You're not going to be able to figure out animals. You're not going to be able to figure out environments. You're not going to be able to piece these together in terms of design. You're going to struggle. So back to core primitives, okay? And by the way, we have three-sided and four-sided pyramids to draw. There's a difference between the two. Some of these are three, most of these are four, but some of these are three, like here and here, but I talk about this in the class. How do you figure out how to draw those and how do you bring them to life? Also, what you're seeing here in terms of drawing is excuse me while I reach for a pencil. These are drawings done with a coal erase pencil. Okay, standard pencil sucks. It really does. It smears. It's often in a 2B or HB. Sometimes it's misrepresented. And it just grinds into the paper. Okay, this, my friends, right here, let me bring it a little closer. That's a coal erase. They're made by Sanford now, coal erase pencil. And this is light blue. Do not buy light blue, and I'll show you why. Because it's really, really light. See that? You can't even see the line I'm putting down. Buy it in a blue. Standard blue is beautiful. This is all done in a blue. So here's another one here. This is black. I just was given this for free. I don't really use it, but I prefer, the colors I really like are blue, violet, and carmine red. Work fantastic, okay? So when I give these pencils to my students and tell them about them, you can get them off of Amazon, okay? They fall in love with them because they're so light, they're so soft, they're easy to erase, they don't smear too bad, they're very forgiving, and it just changes the world of drawing. In fact, a lot of my students, some of the packets of drawing I'm going to show you today, they came back and they were like, oh my God, these pencils are amazing. Well, I've never heard of them, and they've changed the way that I draw, and they totally do. They actually somewhat, they make you a better draftsman, even though that isn't really possible for the pencil, but there's something to say about the right medium and the right technique applying to the way that you're drawing. This is standard cheap 11 by 17 Xerox paper, nothing fancy, not heavy duty drawing paper. And that's all we're doing is just going on top of our stuff and drawing and keeping it simple, okay? So I know someone's gonna go, what kind of pencils are those? That's what they are, okay? There are some other options out there. There are different brands. Coal erase is very user-friendly, and one of the reasons why I introduce it to the class is because it's something I learned in animation. Working in the entertainment field and in the animation industry, we started drawing environments and storyboarding and character design with coal erase pencils, and they're still quite commonly used today. Even though a lot of people have moved to digital, I still prefer to do all of my thumbnails, all my pre-thinking, and definitely anything with animal sketching of character design. I love to do in this pencil here because it's so wonderful and forgiving, okay? All right, so sorry, I don't mean to babble too much. Let's keep moving on. Here's our toruses, also known as a donut. So I took a lot of the basics and the background of what I experienced as a 3D modeler, learning how to model and use shape, and I wanted to teach that to students and go over a basic on how to bring things forward, okay? Then we move into spheres. When we move into spheres, it's really important. If you just draw a sphere and you draw a circle around it, it doesn't indicate anything. So what we do is we put a pencil through that, or you draw an apple, a cherry, or a lemon. By doing that, it allows you to get intersection through that sphere, and it allows you to be able to draw it from multiple angles. By being able to draw it from multiple angles, you have the form and the solidity is coming alive of the object. This feels like it's sitting down on a table. And that's really, really important, because without that, you end up with a circle with just sort of lines around it, and then it could fall apart a little bit, versus when you start drawing through the shape and then you put these other center lines. So we have X and Y axes lines going over that. It makes our drawings become much more realistic, and they start to work. Okay, so the same thing happens when we start moving into other shapes. Okay, these are trapezoid shapes. Again, really important, all created based off the understanding of a simple horizon line. And another thing that's really important that Brendan Kendrick is doing right here, and I got to give a shout out to Brendan because he just killed it in this class. He listened, he worked his butt off. He didn't have any attitude about anything. He just came in and he drew and he produced great, outstanding work. Okay, the other thing that's really important is this, folks. You know what that is? It's overlap, and it's also a principle in design, but I don't really touch too much on the design. It has to deal with grouping. So when you start overlapping shapes in front of other shapes, you start creating a basics of perspective. In fact, one of the key foundational rules of perspective is overlap, having objects in front of other objects. If you can't draw through an object, sorry, I'm pointing at the screen. When I'm not pointing at the work, if you can't draw through and understand how other shapes overlap each other and draw through, look at how you can barely see it here, but he drew a line through right here, and we can see the back side of that. That's so important. That's such a huge point of drawing that can't be skipped. And right now, the majority of students that I get from basic drawing classes that are coming out from all over, is a lot of them not even from my campus and my school, really don't know anything about this. And this is the topic we're covering in the first week of the class. So, back to basic principles. Okay, then we start taking our core shapes and we start taking multiple shapes, putting them together, and we start creating different things. So we focus on organics, we focus on drawing through the organics, then we start to focus on cutting into part of those organics, drawing through the shape, sliding, moving some shapes around, just having a fun time with part of our design process, okay? Then we start looking at props that exist in our daily life. These are things that we see in our house. These are things that we use a prop. In animation, entertainment, and gaming is anything touched or used by a human hand. So I ask my students to go out and start looking at props, and we start building up their shapes, thinking about core primitive shapes and how those core primitives are creating and making those elements, okay? And then we start also getting into drawing principles that deal with additive and subtractive. So this is one of the things with additive is we add multiple shapes together. And then with subtractive, we take a shape like this and then we carve into it and we understand the shape that's there. Or if we come over here and cut into this or splice that lid, and doesn't that sort of look like a water bottle? So you can see where part of that foundational drawing comes in of understanding shape and form and how to draw it correctly. Okay, so Brendan, great work here. Excellent stuff, buddy. So proud of you, dude. You killed it in this class. And not just Brendan, I have a bunch of other students that also did very well. So part of this is just, the other thing too is this is your imagination. You're not looking at things. So this is creating a cognitive skill set in your brain, forcing you to think about how to draw, how to piece things together. That's like the principle when somebody sculpts. They don't have anything there and they need to add things to make the object that they're viewing. That is a particular cognitive skill set that is taught, that's learned over time with practice, right? So it's the same thing here with drawing. When we start drawing and we're not looking at anything and we're just creating fun shapes, boom. So the benefit of that is then when we start moving into other things that we see. So when we look at a car, I don't know if you can see it, the drawings are very light here, but there is a base right here. Look, you can draw through the shape. You can find the back corner right here to that rectangle. So he's drawn through part of that shape. He understands how this exists in a box shape. He understands, look, there are center lines wrapping over the top of this car. This is a center line going over the top of the car there. We start talking about taking basic shapes, drawing center lines over them so we understand both sides. That way you understand what's happening over here on this tire, and you understand how that tire transfers over to the other side, okay? So once we start doing this and we start breaking down drawings into simple shapes, everything starts clicking because we're really just taking squares and cubes and cylinders and we're putting them together, and their size variations are coming together to make the detail of the element that we're seeing. And that right there, folks, is how you become better at drawing from your imagination. So even though this might be drawing from reference, you can leave this. If you do 5 pages of this, you can step away from this and start creating vehicles out of your own imagination, because you understand the principles of perspective, shape, and form, and you know how to arrange those shapes to make vehicles. And once you start to do that, boom, you just explode. And I think that's sort of what happened with some of my students here in this class, is they just take that and they run and they just start creating all kinds of really cool, badass things that they're just thinking of out of their imagination, you know? That's the principle of what you're supposed to do, you know? And again, one of the other things, I'm going to stop right here. Let me shuffle. Look at all this paper I've gone through already, okay? About 15 to almost 20 sheets. The other thing that we're doing is mileage. Look at the drawing mileage that's happening. Boom. You're filling 11 by 17 pages. You're not sitting here doing 3 in a corner. 3 in a corner sucks. Okay, drawing mileage. I wish I had my bottle of pencils here, but I don't. I have a big giant bottle of pencil stubs that I've collected over like 7 years of drawing, and I have another giant bottle that has about 8 to 10 years in it of just stubs of pencils to show your mileage to somebody. There's a lot of mileage happening in here. It's beautiful. It's great samples of drawings, okay? So, you know, just taking simple shapes, simple props, knocking them out, and then, you know, if you feel comfortable to push that level of detail, you go for it. You start to push some of the shapes. You start to push some of the exterior detail. Now, I'm just touching on something that's one of the differences that's not really taught anymore, and it's one of the biggest problems with how artists work and how they learn how to draw. And that is that you usually learn how to draw by copying detail, but you don't learn how to draw by understanding the fundamentals of shape and form. Now, by understanding shape and form, you can come back and you add the details on. That is the correct way to draw. It's like baking a freaking cake. Would you take the frosting and start making the outside of the cake first? No. You bake a cake, you take the core foundation of the cake, you put multiple layers, you put your strawberry in the middle or your ice cream or whatever. Then when the cake foundation is done, we come back and then we add the frosting on the outside. And all that frosting is all these details. But if you can't understand how to draw that shape and form and make it make sense on a horizon line, your drawing is not going to come together and it's going to fall apart and you're going to have nothing but issues with it. Okay? What we did next in the course is I wanted students to understand, we start moving into organics. And we start talking about organic drawings, and I showed them, it's a demo that's already up on YouTube. I showed them in class with numerous demos, how do we draw and start using line and tone and highlights to get objects to feel realistic, and how do we look at the lighting that's happening in front of us and then produce that on paper to make something pop off the page. And that's exactly what's starting to happen here. Okay, so we in the class, there's a Fullerton Arboretum that's by us. We go to that Arboretum and we draw. And here's some great samples. This is when you're looking at different types of plants on organic shapes, and you're getting in there and you're creating nice thick and thin contour lines around elements. You're coming back over and you're adding little interior lines to show interior detail. It's a little hard to see on the camera right now, but it's in here. And then most importantly, we're using little white highlights. And there's a couple of different white highlights you can do. You can use a Prismacolor pencil. You can use a gel pen. There are even, I found some craft pens that are just pens with white ink that you can use. You can use all these different variations. I even also have some white gouache, and I put it in a little portable bowl and I mix it with a paintbrush and I'll whip it out and do that. Or if you wanted to, if you have like a watercolor set and you have one of these, it's a portable water brush, right? You see that? Nice tip on there. You fill it full of water. You break out your little bowl of paint. Or, for example, here's a brand new koi set that I got. Okay, so this is excellent. This is watercolor, but you could do the same thing with just a white highlight. See the white right there? So I could sit there, put water in here, mix this up, and then boom, I could take a couple pens, and while I'm out in the field, I can start putting some really cool highlights on my work instantaneously, really effectively. So here's the result of it, of going out and all drawing together. So beautiful work there. And again, taking a look at anything that's, I know there's some other classes similar to this class in the industry, and some people call it like, you know, dynamic sketching, or some people even call it basic drawing fundamentals of VisCom. Whatever it is, it all comes down to the basic same thing. It's understanding shapes. It's that simple. Anyone will tell you that. I mean, it's knowing how to draw this and create shapes. And then part of this is what we're doing is we're introducing you to a lighting and rendering technique, which is it's all about contrast. So if you have little darks against little whites, you make things pop. The other thing for students to learn at an entry level is try to do one of these in about 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, your first one might take about 40 minutes, but you'll soon learn that if you put white highlights everywhere, you kill the object. So the goal is not to kill the object, but to actually think about where your highlights go. And this is where you get into, this has to do with composing and design, having areas of detail and areas of rest. It's really simple principles of composition. So you might have an area of a highlight here, then you have an open area with nothing there. You might have an area of a highlight here, then you have an open area here. You also need to think about contrast. You might have a dark line against a white line. That's going to get that area to pop, okay? So when you're doing your drawings and then you're transferring them from here into this and this, you need to start thinking about, how do I get my drawings to pop? How do I make them feel realistic? How do I make them start to come alive? And this is how you do it, okay? Great stuff, Brendan. Killing it, buddy. Brendan just worked his tail off, and it's just so cool as an instructor, and not just Brendan. I have a couple other students I'm going to show you today when they work really hard like this. Now we're even getting into some really cool graphic sensibilities, right? Where you're thinking about the leaf and what's behind the leaf, how that pops out. Here he found this really cool pen that was like a whiteout pen. He wanted to try that and see how that would work. So that's great. It's beautiful. Another fantastic way of drawing, And this is the thing about when I get students that draw and they're good at drawing, but some of them have like an attitude. And it's like, dude, you don't have an attitude. You just go in there and you do the best. You try to do the best job you can to make the best work. There's always somebody better than you. And you need to remember that people are always growing on different increments and getting better and better over time. So you need to spend the time to just take the time to be humble, to draw, and to love what you do. Okay, here's some tree studies. So yeah, when we get into organics, I start talking a little bit about trees and the shape language that make up trees and understanding how to draw them. And to give respect where it's due, I showed some samples from Paul Felix. Way back in the day, I took a couple classes from Paul Felix and Jim Schlenker and a couple other designers out in LA, in Sam Mitchlap, and who else did I have? Robert St. Pierre, Michael Spooner. I learned a tremendous amount from them when it comes to understanding shape language and how to draw and design. So I also try to communicate, let me rotate this page. I try to communicate that to my students and show them some basics of understanding principles of draftsmanship and drawing, but how to stylize things and also have fun with it. We're basically here, we're starting to get into the principles of understanding shape and how that language is working and how it's manifesting into other designs, right? And then that's the great thing about going out. Everyone has a park by them. Everyone has an old tree in the neighborhood, and it's so easy to overlook the beauty of an old tree. Looking at the curve of it, looking at the detail of the branches, the bark. There's so much to learn in terms of drawing mileage. And when you do that, in the class we take that, and then I do a couple of demos on drawing environments with a dedicated horizon line, so we understand how we're drawing props and other related organic shapes in a three-dimensional world. And that becomes huge because look, now you start developing these beautiful little compositions on how to place things together. This is key, right? And while you're doing this and drawing the organics, you're thinking about the relationship to the world that they exist in, which is dictated upon how you are looking at this world, right? Right. Okay. Man, what happened to good old-fashioned sensibilities of understanding drawing and draftsmanship? I mean, look at this page here. I mean, look at how beautiful this page is. Just a variety of different trees. Oh, Brendan, you're killing it, man. This is just gorgeous stuff, it's absolutely wonderful, okay? So then one of the other things, I do a demo talking about basic shapes, talking about understanding leaves and leafy plants, and how do you put leaves together and bring them into a grouping to start, creating a dedicated tree that has overlap with multiple leaves in it. Okay. We talked about center line, gesture, grouping, overlap, shape, size, line, value, and texture of object. I know. I'm just looking at it because Brendan took all those notes and he put them down here in the corner. So these are things that you should be learning when you're out drawing and sketching, in a basic drawing class. Okay. Then after that, voila, we jump into, let me make sure the pages are in right order. Actually, the pages are not in right order. I'm going to move them and adjust their order really quick. I apologize. Brendan has so much golden stuff. So one of the other things that I noticed happening in a lot of our drawing classes is we have students coming in that have no understanding of really how to draw the human figure. And that really bothers me as an artist and instructor, because if you take a basic drawing class and you come to me and you can't even draw a person, to me there's an issue with that. And that's just my personal opinion. And if you're if you're somebody who totally disagrees with me and you think that belongs in a figure drawing class, that's fine. I don't care what you think. You can believe that. What I'm getting about is my whole focus on this class is understanding the principles of shape. And this right here, folks, is a simple basic mannequin. You can pick this up at a Daiso, which are these little local Japanese stores we have here in California. This guy cost me $4. Okay. I take him, I turn him around, and actually I have multiple versions of these. Hold on. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it does. Boom. Okay. Look, I have the tall one. So, and I'm going to give credit where it's due. I learned this from an instructor I had at university whose name was Don Lagerberg. And Don Lagerberg was in, by the way, back in that day, I had classes with my buddy Justin Sweet, who's now big time famous concept artist, right? So this is how Don taught us how to draw and understand the human figure right here. If you have a mannequin and you can draw this mannequin and you can pose that mannequin, boom, you can draw that mannequin from multiple angles. You understand the difference between an x-axis, a y-axis, and that means you can take this, you can look at it, you can draw it from different points of view, you can rotate it in your brain and head. Bingo. Okay, so that's what we do in my class. We take simple mannequin shapes and we start going through and we spend multiple weeks going over the core principles and understanding, how to draw the human figure. Well, the human figure, let's take that out and let me re-say that statement. We spend multiple hours and weeks learning how to draw a series of core fundamental shapes stacked on top of each other to give the proportional illusion of the human figure. It's the same freaking thing anyway you want to look at it. It's a bunch of simple shapes stacked on top of other shapes with a center line or line of action, okay, or gesture line to create the impersonation and illustration of the human figure. And that's exactly what it is. And you know what? I've had so much success with this in teaching students. I've had students come to me that have had basic drawing courses. They've had figure drawing courses. They're like beating their heads to death and they still can't figure out how to draw the human figure. I get them in a class and I'm like, give me 4 or 5 weeks of your time and your patience, fill your pages like this, and I will have you jamming on people and understanding how to draw, because one of the core principles of understanding the human figure is understanding, back to that cake metaphor, is understanding the cake and the shape that the icing sits on top of, right? So if you're not going to understand the principles of clothing and fabric and the principles of human anatomy and osteology unless you understand some of the basic principles of shape and form and the dynamics of all those coming together in relationship to visual weight, transition, which is movement, okay, and center lines. That's it. That's what part of the human figure is all about. It's that simple. Okay, so boom, look at this. Page after page. Yes, I even give my students, I sit here and I pose my mannequins and rotate them from multiple angles, and I give my students PDFs of the mannequin, and on top of that I come back and we show them in class. That way my students are forced to learn how to draw the human figure. Then we take those proportions later, and then we go out in public, and then we start looking at people. So when you're looking at somebody sitting down, all you got to do is think about that shape of the mannequin, how these shapes overlap each other. And then when you get that down, we come back over here, and then we start adding the frosting on our cake, which is part of the detail. Yes, there are other things that deal with weight and other things that deal with visual lines. And, this character is walking on a flat ground plane. Yeah, some of that other stuff comes later, but this is the fun part of looking at people and putting them down on paper. Some people have never done this for the first time. And when you start to do this and you start to go in and you just sit there with a clear brain, you're hanging out at Starbucks, you have a piece of liquid cake, a caramel blended frappuccino, and you're sitting there just sipping on or just a big cup of coffee, right? And you're sitting there in a sketchbook and listening to music and you're just drawing. That right there is an irreplaceable feeling that can't be replaced by sitting in a classroom and staring at a still life all day long. It just can't. It's not. I mean, you can't. There's a certain point to that that's fun, but come on. I have students that come to me. I have a student that just came to me that took classes at another institution in basic drawing and figure drawing, and all they did was stare at like model shapes of like wooden mannequins and stuff like that. And they never went out and drew any people. Like, how do you understand people if you can't go out and observe them and watch look at this guy pushing a bag. There's a weight involved there. Look at someone reading a book, how they distribute their posture and their weight. Look at this guy carrying a bag. This all, when it comes to drawing people out from observation, it all has to deal with, and for you to understand as the artist, how is weight being distributed? Because when people are in movement, sitting down, do they have a 10-pound bag, a 50-pound book? Do they have a huge backpack? Are they pushing a roller case? All that is going to give you the true understanding of the human figure. When is the human figure at rest? What happens to the human figure at rest? What happens when an arm goes into fabric and fabric wraps around? What happens when somebody's, standing at a front of a party and they have a glass of wine or a beverage in their hand? What happens when somebody's not paying any attention, looking at their cell phone and they're walking? They tend to lean forward a little bit, not paying any attention. What happens when you open up a magazine? Usually people stop and they're dead centered with a symmetry line and they look and boom, and they sit there. And what do? And they read and find their information. So, all those things come out when you're drawing people. And then especially you can start even later on making a transition into facial features and understanding how the face works and understanding how the noses and eyes come together. That's more advanced, and you start going into other areas. That's where you want to take a head and hands class. But let's go back to the basics here. We're talking about people at one point that have never sat down and drew people in a public setting before. This is where you start. And a lot of times you don't even have to get into this level of detail. Part of your detail is just understanding the basics of human structure like this. If you can do that, you're already, 10 steps ahead of your competition. In fact, when it comes to storyboarding, if you can do that, and you can place people in multiple positions inside vehicles and turning them around, different points of view, boom, you're golden right there. That's the answer to part of the whole riddle, right? Okay, at the very end of the class, what we do is, now that students have been going over shape and design, I give them, shape and principles of draftsmanship, I give them an assignment that deals with drawing and designing. And for the assignment, I give them a couple base locations. And what we do is we pick a location that has character to it. I have students go in and they gather reference, and I have them create visual descriptors and little points that deal with the particular subject matter that we're going to deal with. And then what we do is we go develop the props for that subject matter. We spend time drawing all those props and going through all the variations. Okay, so here are some of the props. This particular student picked props that dealt with a fish store. So now I get to go over, take everything we've covered in the class and bring it all together from a drawing perspective. of working as a designer. Now you have to gather reference. You have to pick the location of your store, think about the history, think about the time period, think about the subject matter. When I say that subject matter, and the way things were built, were things built out of wood and iron? Was it, what kind of fabrication processes did they have? Were things only fabric? What does an old boat dock look like in Russia versus an old boat dock that might look, be off the coast of Japan? Versus a boat dock that's in England, right? You have 3 different countries from all over the world. They're going to have an old boat dock because they all go out and fish. So what are the props going to look like? What's the historical and the cultural significance? Okay, what is an Arab boat dock going to look like in Morocco versus a boat dock in Central California? Those are really important things. What do the boats look like? What does the Mediterranean look like? What do the anchors look like? All those things happen here, folks. This is where you do your research. You look at your props. You bring them together. Then we take the props and then we start organizing them, and we start coming up with some little simple thumbnail designs on simple ideas for shape variation and silhouette. And then we come up and we go into a rough drawing. And we do a rough drawing with an idea of what our design is going to look like for our little fish store here. Okay, and then after that, we go into a finish line drawing, and then we take our finish line drawing, we add tone, we add light to it, and bam, this is the outcome. And then I'm also teaching you a wonderful technique here, which was used as a technique I learned in the animation industry, which is Prismacolor pencil on tracing paper, which is absolutely fantastic. Still a great way to draw, still used by a lot of sketch artists and character designers, okay? Even though a lot of people have gone digital, there's so much to learn from this technique that you can apply to a general setting, okay? All right, and then that's our finished product. And then I ask students to basically render this out with a light source coming from either the left or the right. In this case, it's a little hard to see, but you can see that Brendan has light source coming in this way because we have light side, dark side. Okay, so you notice light side, dark side, light side, dark side. We keep it really simple. We do one rendering. Now, I've had so much success with this class and students doing so good, okay, that now I even have a second part to the class that allows us to focus more on the draftsmanship and design part, drawing from your imagination, and then also moving into this stuff right here. Good old-fashioned design and drawing work. And here's the thing that separates somebody that can do this and somebody who goes to a class and draws still lifes of vases and cubes for the whole entire semester. The student created this out of their imagination. I gave them an outline of a paragraph and told them a location to pick, and then I told them to run and have fun. This is where your creativity as an individual comes out. This is where your ability to do multiple items in terms of cognitive progression and cognitive development and learning in the brain, where you have to gather the reference, you have to interpret the reference, you have to develop an idea, you have to translate that idea into a different type of medium. We do thumbnails, we do a rough line drawing, then after that we make copies of that, and then we do a couple little tonal passes, then we go to a finished line drawing. Do you see that? There's all those stages that are represented there, and all those stages in cognitive learning are so much better than just sitting and staring at a still life of cardboard boxes that don't move. I'm sorry, but I think many of you would probably agree with that, and that's the reason why I wrote this class and put it together. So I'm going to stop right here. I have a couple other packets I want to pull up. I'm going to flip through them a little bit faster, not talk as much, but I thought I would use Brendan's work right here as a core understanding to the principle of this course and why I think it is such a valuable part for any artist to understand. And before I finish up here, let me look at all this, folks. Look at all these pages here. In our class here, we had 60, I think 7 pages total. And then look at this, all right here, all stacked on top of each other. The other thing that's great about this is the student just didn't do 3 drawings on, 18 by 24 paper that are rendered out. Look at the mileage in here, okay? Anyone who's a pro, who's really good, I don't care if you're a fine artist and you jam at drawing and designing. I don't care if you're a professional illustrator. I don't care if you're a medical illustrator, if you're an animation artist, a concept artist. The one thing that everyone's going to tell you, How do I get better? It's all about drawing mileage. How many miles do you draw a day? How many pages do you go through? How many pencil stubs do you have? That's what makes you a better artist in the end. End of story. All right? Okay. Thanks, guys.